Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar that we hold every year for applicants that are considering applying to the Guthman Musical Instrument Competition. My name is Jason Freeman. I'm here with my colleague Gil Weinberg and Morwaread Farbood, who is from NYU and was one of our exceptional judges in last year's competition. And we're going to go ahead and get started. There are a few things that we're going to take care of today, just to share some information about the competition and about Georgia Tech, the format, submission guidelines, things like that, some of our perspectives. And then we will open it up for your questions. So feel free to enter your questions anytime in the Q&A panel. And Sandra, a graduate student in music technology here at Georgia Tech, will be moderating that, and we'll get to your questions at the end of the session today. So before we get into Guthman specifically, just a few quick words about Georgia Tech and our role in music technology. The School of Music here offers 4 music technology degrees, a Bachelor's of Science, a Master's of Science, a PhD in music technology, and a dual Bachelor's Master's program. We're also part of a joint degree with the computer science program here in computational media. And these are really interdisciplinary degrees that are educating the next generation of designers, developers, leaders, entrepreneurs in music tech that really combine creative skills and technical and STEM approaches to the emerging field of music technology. We also have the Georgia Tech Center for Music Technology here, which is really the center for all of our exceptional research in the field of music technology. And I'm going to go ahead and let my colleague Gil introduce himself for a moment here and also tell you a little bit more about the center and its work. Gil, I think you're muted.
Okay, good morning. I hope you can see me. I cannot see myself, so I believe the video is on.
We can see you and hear you.
Okay, good. So I'm the director of the Center for Music Technology, where all of the research from the different groups at Georgia Tech's School of Music are hosted. There's no hard line between the school and the center, but in general, the school is overseeing mostly the educational, and the center is about research. We have now 6 groups working on different aspects of music technology. In general, we are trying to reimagine how music will be made and performed and consumed in the future. The work that our students are doing is kind of exploratory. It ranges anything from DSP, digital signal processing, and MIR, or kind of computational methods to understand content from music, through robotics, through applications that will use music to all kinds of other benefits, and whether it's health or educational, learning how to code, for example, in the computational music for all group. Focus on perception and musicology is something that goes throughout the center, but we have a particular group that focuses on that. And we actually have 2 new groups that will address performance and production, and also all kind of interaction and immersion in the sense of multi-speaker arrays in different scenarios. It can be for home, for studios, and others. In general, the kind of work that we are doing is trying to create software and hardware and instruments that will be used by creative people, but we also have very strong emphasis on using it creatively ourselves. So most of our students and researchers are also musicians that are participating creatively in using all of the hardware and the software that we develop.
Thanks, Gil. And I think, between the research that happens here and the degree programs that I mentioned on the last slide, the point I'm trying to make here is that we love the Guthman competition. We love hosting it here at Georgia Tech, not only because it's such a cool and wonderful event and it's building this community of practitioners in musical instrument design, but because it connects so much to the education and the research interests of our faculty and our students. And so it's really a signature event for us as a way to get to know all the wonderful people and the innovations that you all are working on when you come as finalists to campus to share that work with us each year. If you're interested in learning more about Georgia Tech, about our degree programs in music technology, about the research happening in the center, we've got some websites, and you can, of course, reach out to us at any time as well. But that's not really what we're here about today. We're really focused on the Guthman competition. So let me say a quick few words about the history of the competition and how it works. It actually started because an alum of Georgia Tech gave a gift to Georgia Tech to create a piano competition here every year, and that began in 1998. And then in 2009, we reimagined the competition to be not about pianos, piano performance, but about musical instruments and musical instrument design, because it was really something that seemed more in sync with the growing interest in music technology that was happening here at Georgia Tech. We give out $10,000 in prizes each year. We've had a lot of past winners of the competition that have gone on to enjoy great success in the commercial space or in kind of artistic work with their instruments. But it's really kind of radically open to anyone and everyone. If you have a startup company, if you're a musician or an artist, if you're an academic, student, or if you're just kind of doing something on your own that you're not intending to sell to lots of people or turn into a multi-million-dollar company, that's awesome too. And many of our past winners have been of that nature as well. So we recognize and celebrate that there's many different reasons that people are driven to make new musical instruments, because they want to create something for other people to make music in new ways, because they want to create something for themselves to make music in new ways. And we really want to create a community that is open to all of these people and the work that they're doing. The competition has had a lot of global reach and recognition with major press coverage in places like Wired and on the Today Show and in the New York Times and the Guardian over the years, and is really recognized now as as one of the preeminent venues for innovation in music technology, and particularly musical instrument design. So the format is fairly straightforward, as most of you probably already know. There's a call for applications that's out now with a deadline of October 3rd, so in a couple of weeks. The application is free. It's fairly short and straightforward. We'll go through some of the details a little bit later on. In December, we'll notify approximately 10 finalists that we're inviting them to Georgia Tech to compete in the competition in person. And this first round of review is done by an internal review panel here at Georgia Tech that consists of faculty in the School of Music. And then those finalists come for 2 days to campus. Georgia Tech campus is located right in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia, and will present their instruments to the judges, usually in 15-minute time slots where you can give a presentation, you can give a short performance as well. And then there will be a public concert, which is usually in our Performing Arts Center. It's usually sold out. About 900 people will attend, where you'll perform on your instrument along with a musician from the Atlanta area that we'll match you up with. And it's really a celebration of all of your work. And then we'll announce the winners at the end of that event. There's also hands-on fair as part of the public events that day, where people can come and see work in music technology and art and technology hands-on. The prizes are on the slide here. There's no cost to participate. We provide a modest honorarium to try to defray the cost of your trip to come here as well if you're selected as one of the finalists. I want to turn it over to Gil now, who is going to talk about the judges in the 2024 competition. And then Gil, I'm hoping you can also introduce Mary. And then Mary, we're going to ask you to talk for a few minutes and really share your perspective as a judge from last year's competition and any advice you have to people who are applying to this year's edition.
Sure. And I'll take the opportunity to mention how we go about judges in general. Usually we try to have people with different hats, different aspects of musical instruments joining as a panel. We often try to have a musician that actually uses these instruments. We'll have an academic who thinks about instruments from that perspective. And we also try to have people from the music industry because we hope that some of our instruments actually will make themselves into industry. Here and there, we had other people such as journalists and other thinkers, but this is generally the three main categories for judges. This year is a special year because it's the first time we actually decided to bring judges who used to be competitors, some of them even winners. And we believe that each one of them have some aspects of the three different areas that I mentioned. Bosco Kante is a musician. He's a winner of previous Guthman, but he's also an industry, possibly even leader now, thanks to the instruments that he showed in our competition, and he's now trying to commercialize it so he can bring multiple perspectives, both of from the industry, as he knows a lot how what is the process of bringing instruments from a prototype into the industry. We have Andrew McPherson, one of the leading academics in the field of NIME, a new instrument for musical expressions. He has been participating in the competition multiple times and really a leading scholar in this area. And we have Kelly Snook, who worked on the Mimu glove and presented it here. Mimu glove is also a commercial product. And she actually has experience in NASA as an engineer and can bring perspectives as an instrument designer as well as a performer as an engineer. And we also have Mary here, Mary Farbood, a professor at NYU. And she has been a judge. She was a judge last year. And I really appreciate the efforts that she has made that we didn't even think about. She created a whole system on how to look at instruments, which I hope she can share with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Gil. I'm really happy to be here. I had a terrific experience as a judge this past year. And I'll give you some high-level perspective on how we, the judges, kind of took a bird's eye perspective of all of the instruments, as well as some specifics that we talked about and went through as we were making decisions on essentially deciding who would win and for what reasons. And I have to say, it was not an easy decision-making process because every instrument, because there's such a wide variety of them, have certain strengths and weaknesses by their very nature of what sorts of interfaces they are to begin with. So let me be a little more specific here. So before we went into actually judging each entry, we got together, the three judges, including myself, and we had kind of a high-level discussion about how to categorize the various entries. So we would ask questions like, well, how similar is this particular instrument to successful acoustic instruments that we all know and love? Or we might ask, well, is this an extension perhaps of an acoustic instrument as opposed to a standalone instrument, right? Which are actually different categories and with, as I said, strengths and weaknesses. And, if it is a standalone instrument, well, fine. But if it's not, does it require a lot of, say, programming on the back end from a technical perspective? And of course, there's the complexity of the instrument or the interface itself. You can have very simple instruments and very complex instruments, and they can both be very successful. So that was kind of like a meta level discussion we had. And then we thought about very specific ratings categories that we would consider and how important those various categories were. So, for example, from a very basic level, we were thinking, how easy is it to learn the instrument in question? So we're talking about, I guess you could call it a floor. How easily could you just start using the instrument and start making music? And that was one consideration, but perhaps more importantly, what's the ceiling to the instrument? Right, because you have great acoustic instruments like the violin, which are really difficult to play and to learn initially, say. Well, maybe not just initially, but the point is it has a very high floor, a very high floor. It's hard to get into, a steep learning curve, but it has a very high ceiling as well. And you can, say that about all of the acoustic instruments that people know and love out there. So that was one consideration. And we considered the ceiling a more important aspect than the floor in general. And then we tried to break down the various characteristics of the instruments. So that included musical aspects as well as engineering and design aspects. So we were very keen on looking at, well, how unique is this interface? And what does this uniqueness mean? And that could mean, well, it has an interesting type of input, right? you might have a controller where you press some buttons, or you might have something really unique that uses another kind of input. So that was one consideration. And then there was the uniqueness of the design or the aesthetics of the instrument, right? Because you can have, for example, a really unattractive looking instrument, but it does wonderful things. Or you can have a really attractive looking instrument that's, aesthetically very compelling, but maybe not as interesting on the musical end of things. Or you can have both, which would be ideal. And in terms of the engineering characteristics, well, of course, there was quality, like quality of the hardware, the type of software, if applicable, because in some cases, as I mentioned, there's like a back end where it might require some programming of the performer. And then I think this kind of pertains to, I suppose, from an industry perspective, scaling potential was another thing that was considered. And it could be that there's only one thing ever of this particular kind of instrument built because it's so complex and it's so unique, it's just not scalable. So it might be an amazing instrument, but it would be nice if other people could play it as well, perhaps. So that was another consideration. And then in terms of the output and its aesthetic qualities, another important factor was how much can you actually do with it? Like, what is the flexibility of the style of music that you could produce with it? Like, what are the variety of output styles? What is the aesthetic quality of the output and its musicality, affordances? Those were all very important to us. And of course, uniqueness of mapping, because a lot of the entries are controllers, and mapping is such an important aspect of what makes an instrument what it is. And finally, one other consideration, and this was actually kind of, I would say, variably important among participants, among us, the judges, which is connectivity. Like, does it connect to other devices or other instruments? And I guess from a less technical, more broader perspective, is this something that you could actually play with other people, which is important, right? Because musicians play together, and being able to play with other instruments is important. So I would say, in a nutshell, those are the kinds of things that we discussed and we considered when we went about making our decisions. And as I said, it was not simple to do all of this. And there were times when we felt like we were maybe a little bit, comparing apples and oranges. And so, we would have differences of opinion, but we discussed them, we'd work through them. And in the end, I think we were all satisfied with the agreement that we made on the prize winners. So I hope that helps a little bit. I'm happy to answer any questions and give you some more perspective about our discussions. But I think that would summarize, the main points of what we focused on.
That's super helpful, Mary. I learned a lot just from hearing you talk through this myself. I'm curious, before we move on, what are some kind of key things that are really important for you, that were really important for you as a judge to know about the instruments? So as people are preparing their applications, there's a video and there's some statements they write. Were there things that you wished you knew that you didn't about some of the instruments, or kind of gaps in your knowledge? What would you recommend that people be sure to kind of explain as they're preparing those materials?
Okay, a couple of things. That's a very good question. I think, first of all, it was very helpful to be able to be there and see the instrument played in person, to be able to try out the instruments as well, if possible. That was super helpful and added a whole other dimension beyond the presentations. And, there were good presentations and less good presentations, I would say. And the best presentations, I think, showed off the instrument in a variety, like in all of the ways that it could be, not every single way, but many ways that it could be played, that showed a range of possible musical output and, a good idea of how it functioned. I would say, in terms of demos, which were part of the presentations, I think having someone who really knew how to play the instrument well was important. There was perhaps some presentations where you felt like that, the actual talk was interesting and the explanation, but the actual demo was maybe a little less, well done. So I think that would be one piece of advice. Like, make sure the demo really shows off the instrument at its best.
Great, thanks, Ray. We'll come back to you for questions in a couple minutes. I'm just going to go over, kind of with that, a segue just into the initial application criteria and go through this in a little bit more detail first. So the application is, we've deliberately kept it simple because we want, we want you to be able to apply without too much of a burden on your time. So there's some text that we ask for, and there's a video. The text is fairly standard stuff: bio, description of your instrument, and then some additional information that can be a little bit more technical in nature about the design, engineering, and musical features of your instrument, if you want to get into the weeds there. But kind of the core of the application is really a video, short video, 3 to 5 minutes long. You post it on YouTube and then just send us the link to it. And it's really geared towards a non-expert audience. If you want to put in all of the nitty-gritty details, you can put those in those descriptions about the design, engineering, and musical features of the instrument. But the point of the video is to do a demonstration. And I think, Mary, what you just said about really, playing your instrument well and showing off what it can do is really important there. And then talking about, why did you create it and what is its potential? So we're really just trying to get that, that story out of the video, and then a really compelling demonstration of it in use. And people take all different kinds of approaches to making these videos. Some of them look like Kickstarter videos. Some of them really focus on a performance with very little explanation. Some of them are really mostly explanation with a brief demo or performance. All of that is fine. We want you to do this in a way that makes sense for you and is really consistent with how you want to share the instrument. But the key is really to make sure that anyone looking at this video is going to really understand what your instrument is about, what it can do, and see it in action. We have lots of examples of videos that people have submitted from past competitions. If you go through the history page on the Guthman website, you'll see that we link to the finalist videos from the last several years, and you can watch those. I just pulled out the video that was submitted by last year's winner, the Zen flute, Keith Baxter, as an example. And I think this is an interesting example because it's not like a flashy, heavily edited video or something like that. It's just very much Keith talking about, very much just Keith talking about the instrument and demonstrating it. So it's a 3-minute video. I'm just going to play the first minute or so of it so you can get a sense of what these videos look like.
Hi, I'm Keith Baxter, and this is the latest version of the Zen flute. It's a MIDI controller controlled by your mouth. You could call it a mouth theremin, but instead of using radio waves, it has a small speaker and a microphone, and it uses a pilot tone to map out the acoustic resonant volume of your mouth to control pitch, and thereby you get the advantages of the fine articulation of your mouth and the intuitive use of our mouth in making music to control pitch. So it has a single button, turns on the pilot tone, has a joystick for other control parameters. In this case, you heard some overblowing and some harmonic additions, but it also puts out MIDI, which is its primary purpose. It's a MIDI controller in digital MIDI, and also has the current loop, classic current loop MIDI. And I'll let you hear what that sounds like in just a second.
All right, I'm going to stop that there. I think that gives you a general sense. This video and all the finalist videos from last year are on our website under the history page. So you can take a look. But the point I was really trying to make here is that there's a lot of different ways to go about this. And the key things to hit on are really explaining, what it is, why you made it, and then to give us some compelling musical examples to really show it in practice. So that's the end of our formal presentation here. I see one question already, and I want to encourage everybody in attendance to post any questions you might have to the Q&A section. I'm going to turn off the screen sharing here so that you can see Gil and Mary and myself a little bit better. And Sandra's going to help us with moderating the questions as they come in.
Yeah, so currently we have one question in the Q&A queue. Francisco asked, he wants to patent his instrument. Does a posting on YouTube create a problem?
So in the past, we had some people who patented and tried to commercialize and keep it under wraps. What they did, and we were happy to accept, is have a password protected or private video, or even if it's on a different site that you trust more to protect, and we will obviously not share it with anyone. So if that's something that you are happy with, I think your patent should be safe.
If anyone has any other questions, feel free to enter it in the Q&A queue. All right, we have another question from Jordan. So Jordan asked, is there any preference towards standalone instruments versus modifications that fundamentally change the quality of the instrument?
I would say that from my experience, I mean, it was just, my experience and two other judges, not at all. We did not consider one an advantage or not.
Yeah, let me add that when we talk to the judges, my general kind of advice to them is to look at the musicality in terms of what is the input, what is the output, to look at the engineering in terms of the quality and how it's built, and to look at the design. This is the three general categories that judges are looking at. But it's very important to note that every judge and every group of judges will bring their own personal idea of what is a good instrument, and Mary presented her opinion, which I think is shared by many, but you should be ready for different judges looking at different aspects and putting more emphasis or less emphasis on some of these areas.
All right, we have another question from Sam. So Sam asked, is there a preference for instruments that live in the modern technology space, or are purely acoustic instruments also equally considered?
I can jump in on this one. I think that pretty much every year of the competition, we've had acoustic instruments that have been finalists, and we've had multiple winners of the competition that have been acoustic instruments. The most recent one was the Glissatar 2 years ago. Which was a beautiful kind of it's like a soprano saxophone with a ribbon controller instead of keys on it. So we very much welcome acoustic instruments as well.
And then Francisco had a follow-up question. So how about a website? Do you need to have a publicly website as part of the application? He was told this may also be a problem for patenting.
So we as Georgia Tech, we're not in a position to offer legal advice on patenting or anything like that. But a website is not required as part of your submission. It's an optional item. And if you don't have a website on your particular instrument to put in, but you want to put in a website link for your own more general personal website with information about your work more broadly, that's fine too.
And next up, we have a question from David. So David asked, can the instrument be software-based, perhaps relying on existing non-music instrument devices, or is it expected for there to be a hardware component?
In general, we believe we prefer to have an instrument, a physical instrument that you actually play. So that's the main goal of the competition. There are other venues to show all kind of musical software. We did have people who submitted musical software. In some rare cases, we accepted them if it was something unique about how you interact with the software. Not every instrument is actually a physical instrument. You can have a wireless instrument. We have the Mimiu Glove, for example, which you can consider as an instrument because the new gestures that you create and the kind of mapping. But there is a preference in general, at least from Zerotech point of view, when we look at it, to innovate and create something new in how you interact with making the music. Physical instrument or a touchless way of controlling and interacting with sound are preferable.
I'll note, I can think of one recent example of a competition winner. He was second or third place, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, called GeoShred, which was a mobile app. And I think that the judges were really impressed by it because of the way that it leveraged the unique kind of affordances of the touchscreen and the pressure sensitive control on some mobile devices in order to create a really sophisticated touch controller through software only. And so we're certainly open when there's something that really makes it feel like an instrument and not just like a piece of software that's being used like in a digital audio workstation or kind of a music production or composition kind of workflow.
Yeah, maybe another example that took the iPhone for many years ago was Ocarina. And again, it was an iPhone app, but the way of interacting with the iPhone app was blowing into the microphone, which again, we thought was an interesting way to control the sound.
We don't have any other questions in the queue right now, so feel free to type them in if you do have any.
While we're waiting on any final questions, maybe I'll just ask Gil and Mary if you have any final thoughts or takeaways that you want to share in closing, advice as people are preparing their applications, or anything else. Please jump in.
So maybe I'll say a few things. As Mary suggested, we have a wide variety of instruments. It can be an iPhone app, like we just discussed. It can be a wearable way to control music. It can be hardware. It can be acoustics, electroacoustic, only electronic. We have many controllers that really have to be unique in order to make it to the competition. And oftentimes it will be like looking at apples and oranges, but I think the judges have been just looking at the experience. Is this innovating how we can be expressive in creating music? Can this be something that we see on stages as an expressive tool to play music? And then how you do it is maybe less important. So there is a way to kind of average or take all of these inputs together and just look at the final output. Is this an instrument that people would want to play, that will be expressive? Maybe one more word about the ceiling. The idea is that it can be a lifelong experience to learn it, to become better at it. There are many instruments that you can learn quickly and then you're done, and there's no, it's very simple, and there's no push and there's no way to work lifetime to become a very, very good at it, to become a virtuoso. So instruments, no matter what the input and the output are, that can have this high ceiling, are highly preferable.
Mary.
I think there's a few more questions. I was just going to second what Gil said, and I think the aesthetic output is so important. And for me personally, I would say having some flexibility in the style of the output was somewhat important to me. If you could only play like one very like narrow kind of music or sound or whatever, it's not, for me personally, it was not as interesting.
All right, so yes, we do have a couple of more questions. The first one being, is simplicity a plus? Francisco's instrument looks very simple, but it took a lot of computation to optimize it.
I don't know if simplicity is a word I would choose, but have some level of intuitiveness is probably a plus for many of our judges. Again, I cannot commit. Georgia Tech is really letting the judges come up with their own opinion, and they will share it with you when we have this evening when they can speak about their particular approaches, the new judges. So without committing for every judge, I believe that in general, being in the competition from the beginning, I've seen judges looking at how intuitive it to play. Is it something that is really calling for you to play it and you understand how to play it? Is possible as a plus. And I'm not sure exactly what you mean by simplicity, but intuitiveness is what I would say.
Yeah, I would say that, something might be very simple along some dimension, like, some aspect of its technical implementation, but it might be very complex in terms of the aesthetic and musical implications of what you can do with that. And so I think it's, like you said, Gil, I think it's important to understand what we mean by simplicity, and most instruments are very multifaceted in terms of their potential and how they're constructed and all these different elements. And so we certainly look across all of those. Or did you want to jump in on this as well?
No, I think you answered that question very well. And I mean, the truth of the matter is, the dimensions are what's important, right? As you say, it can be extremely simple on one dimension, a very elegant, simple interface, but a lot of stuff going on from a technical perspective to create the output.
Great. So Brian had another question. So Professor Farbood, he really enjoyed your thoughts. He also enjoyed your recent presentation in Tokyo. So would you please riff a little more on your thoughts about the floor versus ceiling dimension you alluded to?
Yeah, sure. Just to build on what Jason and Gil have been saying. So I think, okay, I use the violin example, right? Which is high ceiling, high floor. Really hard to learn to get to a point where you can make decent music. But also, you might never reach that ceiling. I would say piano would be slightly lower floor, but equally high ceiling, because piano interfaces are very popular. Let me give you an extreme of what's not great, I would say, for someone who's thinking about for entering the competition. Low ceiling, but also, low floor, but also really low ceiling. Okay, this is like a very extreme example. No one's going to submit anything like this, but let me give an example. So say you're an amazing composer, okay, and you write this like masterpiece, and it's, you have a bunch of tracks, and you can combine them. It can come up with these cool textures and cool, like everything it's just an amazing piece of music, and your instrument is like a 3-button controller that kind of like mutes certain tracks whenever the performer feels like they want like more texture or less texture, and the output is like so amazing no matter what button you press. It's just like so cool, and it's like so fun to play because the music is so good. But then like, what else does it do, right? and if you're stuck with only what was pre-composed, that is like super low ceiling and super low floor, and in the end it's not very interesting. So that would kind of be an extreme example, but perhaps like high ceiling, high floor would be an instrument that's so complicated that you can't even do like even getting any output that makes sense, is impossible. And the complexity of the interface makes it difficult. Like a violin has a high floor, right? But it's a simple interface, right? You have a bunch of strings, you stop the strings, you have a bow. But if you have like a super complex interface that's really hard to figure out and will take years for someone to really get a grasp on, that's a different kind of, I would say, high floor that's not as good as a violin high floor, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
I hope that clarifies my thoughts on it.
All right, thank you. And then Sam has a question. So any feelings about instruments that are intended to be a commercially sold product? Not sure if the hope is for more speculative instrument design or for something for a broader audience. If an instrument is already associated with a small company, would that be a downside for judges?
So maybe I'll take one step before and just mention something that maybe we didn't mention before, that a big part of the competition is to building communities and to allow people, maybe even students, take a class project and be able to show it to the world, hopefully, and get some community around it. Having said that, we always have, almost always have commercial instruments. I think maybe even always. Either a small startup or even a bigger startup. Teenage Engineering submitted an instrument. For example, if you're familiar with this company, it was earlier on when they just started, but they did, and I think they even won second place. Oftentimes, the three winners, or sometimes we have some kind of other recognition, would be a combination. It can be a student who worked on a very cool class project next to a company like Teenage Engineering and the founder playing on stage. We just look at all of this as similarly important. I think the founder of Teenage Engineering can be part of the community that will help the student who created something from wires that they found in the lab. Obviously difficult to compare, but the potential is clear for the judges, and they can be on the same stage as winners.
I think you put that really well, Gil. I think that it's important to us to support and celebrate and include in the competition people, whether they are looking to commercialize or not, or whatever stage of commercialization they might be at, if they are on that path. We encourage our judges to think about the context in which the instruments are being created and the resources available, because it is very difficult sometimes to make these apples to oranges kinds of comparisons, but it's a challenge that our judges are always up to taking on.
Right. Those are all the questions that we have for now. Should we give it like some time for any final questions?
I think we're just about the end of our time here. So if you all have questions that did not get answered today, if you go to guthman.gatech.edu, there's a button at the bottom if you want to email us, and that sends an email out to everybody on our team, and we'll get back to you very quickly. So we're always happy to answer questions as you're preparing your applications. And we're looking forward to seeing what you submit. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thanks to Gil and to Mary, especially for sharing all of your insights and thoughts. I really appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.